Hello and welcome to ESG Talk, your go-to source for insights and advice for environment, social, and governance leaders. I'm your host, Mandi McReynolds. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Shelly Kramer, President and Chief Evangelist of the Futurum Group, Evan Van Hook, Chief Sustainability Officer at Honeywell. Shelly is a serial entrepreneur with tech-centric focus and works alongside some of the world's greatest brands, helping them embrace disruption and spur on innovation. We'll hear a little bit more about that in the show today. Evan Van Hook is a visionary industry leader. It has earned him the global recognition, including being among the world's 50th most influential ESG executives, as recognized by Constellation Research. So we are excited to talk about their partnership today. It's pulling together a quarterly edition of Honeywell's Environment Sustainability Index, also known as ESI. Welcome to the show, Shelly and Evan.
Thank you. It's great
to be here.
Okay, so let's get after it. Evan, our audience members may not be familiar with this index. Can you give us a brief overview of the goals and the purpose of it?
Certainly. It, to my mind, takes a really interesting perspective on the issue of trying to understand sustainability. There is so much talk and focus on sustainability these days, and you could focus on so many different individual factors. But what the ESI does is it interviews on a quarterly basis more than 700 individuals who are completely professionally devoted to sustainability. These are largely chief sustainability officers and others that really work full-time in this field. And the reason I think that creates a very interesting perspective is these are the individuals who every single day get up and live, breathe, sustainability. Their job is about setting and achieving targets, understanding the scope of the market, understanding how things are progressing. So they are sort of a resource that's able to boil down all the disparate information about sustainability. And actually, if you ask them their sentiment of how are things going? How do you think things are going to be going in the near future or the long distance future? How do you think you're going to approach achieving your goals? You actually can use them as a resource to sort of consolidate all this information into one very valuable and usable sort of source. So I think it's a great perspective on it.
Building on that, Shelly, I love that you embrace disruption and you spur on innovation, but it's rooted, your organization is rooted in research and surveys to do so. So tell us a little bit more from your perspective. How is this survey and assessment different, and what are the unique aspects to your lens?
Well, I think that we have here at the Futurum Group, we have deep roots in asking questions like, what if, or what are people saying, or what if we looked at things this way, or things like that. And early on, when we founded Futurum, we knew that we had deep expertise in the digital transformation space, and we've done similar indexes to the ESI index in the past, focusing on digital transformation, trying to help practitioners in the field understand what's happening. And as sustainability initiatives and interest in sustainability initiatives have grown over the course of the last couple of years, our team has talked a lot about it. And we actually feel like sustainability, and by the way, research is going to bear this out, but that sustainability initiatives today are actually supplanting digital transformation initiatives because they're so important. So in our conversations with the team at Honeywell, part of what we set out to do was to plant a flag in the sustainability space and to say, this isn't about what a brand might want to sell to its customers in terms of solutions or things like that. This is bigger initiative. This is something that we hope will benefit the industry as a whole, the tech industry in particular as a whole, but not simply just focus on tech companies, but really we wanted to be able to gather information from, as Evan said, people who are elbows deep in these initiatives all day, every day, really kind of fighting the good fight, I think. In ways that other people within the organizations aren't doing. And I think some of their challenges are even internal challenges in terms of expressing to others within the organization why a focus on sustainability initiatives is so important, and really being able to be accountable to the various stakeholders throughout an organization and kind of show, here's what the data says that other people in other industries are doing. The challenges that we're experiencing here are not necessarily unusual, and that sort of thing. So we really felt like creating an industry-wide resource that we look at really often, once a quarter. It happens really quickly. So being able to see how the needle is moving, what's changing in the market, I think is really important and a valuable resource to practitioners.
I appreciate this notion of it linking to the digital innovation side and transformation side. Often companies have been criticized because they've put out bold, ambitious statements. Evan is shaking his head if you're watching on YouTube, as well as Shelly. There's this notion of how can we solve for these big global problems? And people are like, well, you don't have concrete plans. It was like, not all innovation has concrete plans, and it takes a transformation, as Shelly said. Interesting enough, these are the 2 points that I thought out of the index that would interest our listeners. First, the vast majority, 83% of companies plan to boost spending in this area over the 12 months to achieve their sustainability goals. Well, only 3% decreased. So I thought that was an interesting financial commitment from companies. On the other end, 9 out of 10 organizations were optimistic about their success in achieving their goals over the past 12 months. So there's this real interest of, I'm going to invest financially. And then there's also this concrete, I know at least the short term will be successful. So I'm curious, Evan, from your perspective, with this spanning 700 organizations, what are some of the trends that are emerging for you that you find interesting?
Yes, as one of those individuals who is up to his elbows in this every day, I can say the thing that I look at this with a great deal of interest every quarter is really actually that long-term 2030 scale of optimism. And we are seeing quarter over quarter that the level of optimism for the longer term goals, and we picked 2030 because that's sort of a benchmark year for a lot of different types of commitments, that optimism is growing quarter on quarter. And the reason why I think that's so important, again, comes back to the fact that these CSOs are really good consolidators of information. So their sentiments tend to reflect a lot of different factors. So when you think about what would make a CSO more optimistic about these long-term goals, well, that, again, speaking of someone who has to live this every day, that's something that is made up of a lot of different factors. First of all, do I see a pathway technologically to getting there? It's one thing to say, hey, I'd like to be someplace, but I'll tell you, your optimism certainly grows if you can start to see that technological pathway. So I think one indicator of that, and again, that is also reflected elsewhere in the ESI, a shift towards technology. I also say, well, okay, there's technology, but can I afford it? And as Shelly just mentioned, we're seeing an increase in budgets for sustainability. And that tells me that they're also saying, hey, I'm going to be able to pursue this technology. Another big factor is, do I have support from my organization? And when you look at the ESI and you say that sustainability and in particular climate, rank at the very top of corporate objectives right now, that tells me that those CSOs are saying, I've got support, I'm developing the budget, I see the technology, I'm feeling better about my chances of achieving these goals. And, having just again lived through this experience, Honeywell started back in 2004 when very few people were making these kind of public commitments. And I remember very well making our first 5-year commitment to reduce our greenhouse gases by 30%. And there were a lot of people thinking that, we were maybe walking out on the plank with not a clear path back. And, so you feel that. And then all of a sudden you start to say, hey, this is, where we're going. And I kind of see a pathway to get there. And then the last thing I will say, and this sort of relates to the increases in budgets as well, is we are seeing a really very positive regulatory sort of framework, particularly with incentives such as in the IRA, which was recently passed in the United States, with a lot of incentives for large technological approaches to reducing greenhouse gases. So that's a Inflation Reduction Act, in case folks aren't super familiar with that term. So all of these things combined, I think, are creating that level of optimism. And I think, again, that level of optimism is a pretty good barometer of where this is all going.
So, Shelly, it's interesting. At Workiva, I do what's called the quarterly business review, and I do it with our teams, and I talk about the state of the market and the latest research and insights, and I'm excited to pull this one in. I talked about the changes from our 2021 practitioner survey to a recent survey that Workiva did on SEC. And I was talking about what a difference the market makes, similar to what Evan just said, even in 2 years. And you touched lightly on this, that this pulse check, this look quarterly moves fast. So taking this direction for us, looking at this data, moving fast, what's something you've noticed about the attitudes?
Well, I think that I'm probably one of the most pragmatic of people. So I will say this, sustainability initiatives fluctuate based on what's happening in the world, right? I mean, we can all be as committed as humanly possible to embracing our climate initiatives. And then, when a war breaks out and, getting your hands on heating oil and those sort of things become a challenge, sometimes we have to make decisions that set us back a little bit. And I think that's important to remember. And I think that, it is a moving target. And so people who are in CSO roles, and I think Evan would probably agree, is that a lot of the job is kind of taking a deep breath and looking at what you've got to work with and trying to make the best of everything that's landing on your plate. And sometimes that's a slight reduction in budget, or sometimes it's a shift in focus for other budget dollars or those sorts of things. So I think that just understanding that it is a space where we are going to continue to see fluctuations. But, one thing that Evan mentioned that I think that we see as a key factor here is that he mentioned setting their first goal, right? And so and that's really part of our passion here at Futurum for all things sustainability and for doing this index and for really keeping our finger on the pulse of what's happening, is that setting that flag, it's like walking out on the plank. It's making a promise. It's making a promise to your shareholders, your employees, your customers. It's making a big promise. And what we're seeing is organizations across the world making these promises. Some promises are tied to 2025. Many are tied to 2030, which, by the way, when they made those promises, 2030 seemed like a long way off. It's not. But the challenging thing is that when you step out on that plank and you make that promise, now as a CSO leading these corporate efforts, you've got a big responsibility to make it happen. Well, how are you going to be able to make it happen without, one, having a great way internally to measure your own progress, and then also being connected to other CSO leaders throughout the world and learning from your peers in terms of what's working, where are the challenges, what's not, what did we think about, what's working that we didn't even think about, and those sort of things. So I think that it's just knowing that it's a moving space and being comfortable with that. And not everybody is comfortable with sort of not clear answers and paths all the time. Some of this is a moving target, and we have to be adaptable and agile and shift as we go.
So it's an interesting dynamic. I love how both of you brought up this idea of, Evan, as I talk to different grad students and college students, it's like, what is the best skill you can bring? And I'm like, it's the tick and the talk. It's that you understand how to do the tick side of like deep data, deep information, consolidated business financials, and bringing it up, and then being able to communicate it. And if you don't have those two skills, you won't be cut out for the role or that are coming as it relates to environment, social, and governance and sustainability. And Shelly, I appreciate so much how you said pragmatism. I was laughing. Lauren is behind the scenes of ESG Talk. She's probably embarrassed that I'm giving her a shout out right now. She makes a lot of the magic happen with the team. And somebody asked me in a media interview, what's your superpower? And I laughed because I was like, I don't know. I focus on my company's superpower. And she's like, she's pragmatism, like through and through. And so it's good. I think there's good confirmation for the field to hear that being pragmatic, not being so woke you take your company broke, but not being so Wall Street that you forget about Main Street, finding that middle ground and being able to move initiatives forward as the world is changing is so critical for the future of the profession. I'm curious, there was one point in the research where you talked about being more tech-balanced approach, and you described 3 different approaches. Shelly, can you unpack that real briefly for the audience so that they can hear what you had in mind as you looked at it about this tech approach?
Well, I think, first of all, there are 3 approaches that we've identified. There's a process-driven approach, which is pretty self-explanatory. We're going to put processes in place that help us do X, Y, Z more efficiently. There's a tech-driven approach where it is investing in, figuring out what technology solutions you need. The answer is you absolutely do need some. Figuring out which ones you need, investing in those, making sure you have a team who knows how to use those tech solutions properly. That's an important part of the equation. And then there's a balanced approach, which is a combination of the two. And I'll step back from this and say, I've been talking about digital transformation for a decade. And a lot of times when you say the words digital transformation, people instantly think technology. But the reality of it is the magic happens when it's a combination of people, processes, and technology. You can't have effective digital transformation journeys with just one of those things. You need all 3 of those things. And I think really that's what a balanced approach here articulates. In the same way that that's important for digital transformation, I believe that's important for your sustainability initiatives as well. Really a more balanced approach.
I think it's incredible to think about is oftentimes as the world evolves, you've got these incredible tools or transferable skills for ESG. And so what we've learned from digital transformation, pulling that through, seeing the data, validate it. And Shelly, thanks so much for unpacking that as our listeners dig in and look deeper into the index. Evan, as we close out, I'm curious, what do you think for the world of practitioners is the critical point you want to share for them as they end listening to the show today?
Sure. If I were to say one point, it really would be get started. And the reason I say that is, at Honeywell, we started 2 decades ago. I see a lot with peers, with discussions with other companies. People are in all different stages of approaching this. There is so much discussion around, how hard it will be, or, there are parts of the economy for which we have not figured out a solution yet. But that ignores the huge swath of your operations for which there are already solutions. Honeywell has reduced its greenhouse gas intensity already by more than 90%. by definition, that was with existing technology. And so I would, if I were to say one thing to someone starting out a CSO kind of path, it would be, keep your eye on developing technology solutions for those things that you know are going to be tough, but get started today. Because, for Honeywell, it was 90% that we could get rid of with existing technologies. Now we can focus on the rest. But to my mind, that's the most important thing.
Get started today. And Shelly, anything to add for your final critical takeaway for the audience?
Yeah, I think that finding the right vendor partners is a really key part of the journey here. And I think that, everybody doesn't have to reinvent a wheel. There are some amazing solutions out there. And I think understanding that, we're seeing today across the board in every realm of business, big players partnering with one another to get things done. And I believe that part of the success on sustainability initiatives is figuring out who's doing amazing things in this space, who's making technology solutions that solve for my challenges, what are other people in the industry using, but finding those vendor partners, developing relationships with those trusted vendor partners. And probably you already have some of these relationships, but really knowing that going it alone is probably not the best path forward. It's working with people who are solving for this all day, every day, because when you do work with them, they bring, a world of expertise to helping solve for your challenges that you wouldn't otherwise have.
So get moving and get some partners are the two big takeaways. Well, Shelly and Evan, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of ESG Talk, brought to you by Workiva, the world's unifying platform for financial, ESG, audit, and risk. And to our listeners and those around the globe joining us, thanks for tuning in. If somebody needs a dose of optimism or maybe the initiative to get going, feel free to share this episode of Shelly and Evan. Check out the index. We'll put it in the show notes for you, and we'll talk real soon.